Hey everyone, it's Michael Zapersky and welcome back to another episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. Today, I'm very excited to have Cynthia Mills join us. Cynthia, welcome.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's great to be with you today.
So Cynthia, you are an author, a speaker, you're the president and CEO of The Leader's Haven, and your clients include many local and kind of statewide, but also international brands in finance, energy, publishing, media, and a whole bunch of other industries. And your insights on leadership have also been featured on A&E, Bravo, and in other kind of media and publications. So I'm really excited to have you with us today to talk more about kind of how you got to where you are, lessons learned along the way, and best practices as you've been building your consulting business, because you're not new to consulting. You've been doing it for some time. So why don't we start off and have you share, because I'm interested to kind of hear why are you known, or why were the nicknames of the Board Whisperer and the Chief Experience Weaver? Like, where did those come from? And then I want to take us back to how you even got to where you are today. But just first, if you could touch on those two kind of nicknames that you have.
I think one of the things that I loved when I was sitting in the CEO seat was, in fact, the dynamics of how you help people make great decisions. And so part of that to me is really spending the time to understand the dynamic that's already present and how they would like to have that evolve. And over time, I've had clients who labeled me the Board Whisperer because I think they felt like that I was really good at listening underneath the dynamics and helping them then to evolve in those ways that sort of freed them into new ways of thinking. The Chief Experience Weaver has come from being someone who designs. So I design facilitations or design leadership experiences. And I think what's so important to me about that is that you don't want to come into a space with everything predetermined. You want to design in a way that people are both co-learning together, as well as learning from a facilitator. And so hopefully that's been part of the reason why people have seen me as a Chief Experience Weaver.
You talked about the kind of the power of listening, right? Asking great questions. And I think most consultants, if they've been around the block or kind of, in a consulting community for a period of time, like they've heard about that, and they hopefully have embraced that idea of how important it is to be a good listener and to ask really great questions. For you specifically, is there anything either related to listening or asking questions that is a go-to for you? It's just kind of a way that you do things that you have found to be really powerful, like anything kind of beyond that surface level, if you could add any kind of context or detail to offer to people.
For me, I think the key moment is when you're experiencing pushback in dialogue. And what I want to do in that moment is listen underneath it for the why. Because usually what I've found is there's either an absence of information that's needed, or there's fear. And if there's fear, is it fear of loss of something, whether it's loss of face or loss of position, or what's the reason for the underneath? That's the go-to for me, because I want to understand pushback so that it doesn't get labeled in an emotional way in conversations, so that feedback can then actually be heard by others.
Right. So let's take the example of a CEO or an executive that you as a consultant might be dealing with, and you are working together, or maybe it's just before working together, you propose something, or you say, here's what I think, here's what I recommend, and they push back and say, no, we're not going to do that. Where does your mind go? Kind of, what do you start thinking about doing or asking at that moment?
Yeah, I want to know in that moment, what has led them to the construct of the how for them. So what do they believe they're going to get as a result of how they've constructed it? And that way I'll be able to actually understand better. Right. And then secondly, I'll be able to then either respond with I understand where you're headed, I'll adjust, or I can respond to, here's some other things that you might want to think about that if we add into the process, might also expand it in these ways. What do you think about that? So I like to stay in a place of listening and inquiry and offering up, as opposed to sort of know your construct is wrong.
Right. And how would you engage and kind of drill into identifying the construct or the way that they're thinking so that you can formulate how to best respond? Like, what are some of the questions that you might ask, or how you kind of structure that or set things up so that you could really get to the heart of the matter?
Well, I think the first thing I want to know is, has the CEO designed it themselves on their own? Or has the CEO been in, working with, a board, or has the CEO been working with a group of leaders that have been designated in a task force, around this? Because that'll help me understand whether or not it's the CEO's point of view or
Right.
whether this is a collective.
Yeah.
So I want to know that first. And then what I would want to go to is the intended outcome. So I mentioned that before, right? The intended outcome, but then underneath it to find out if they were to go back with an adjustment to that construct, what's the political price they might pay?
Mm-hmm.
And is that political price worth it to them? Now, I wouldn't necessarily say it exactly that way,
Sure.
but I would want to be looking at that. You have to understand, what is the leader being asked to risk in the process, and whether or not this is the moment they choose to risk that or not. And if not, then you take them as far as they can go, and hopefully you get a chance to continue to work with them.
Right.
And that risk, opportunity shows up later.
And do you find, like, is your process and your approach to typically try and identify as much of that information as you can before you provide any kind of recommendations, or do you still find that even after many years you will provide recommendations and there's still pushback because maybe there are certain things that can't be covered before you provide recommendations, in terms of like digging deep to really understand what they're thinking and everything else going on? Or how do you kind of approach that or think about that?
I've found a lot lately that that people are coming with preconceived notions. And so, and some of this has to do with speed of wanting to get something accomplished.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I do try, if at all possible, to at least have a conversation. For instance, if it's a response to an RFP, it's really helpful to have a conversation before that. And you find out then, how open are they and how
Mm-hmm.
much are they willing to divulge, right? Before that, or are you going to give it your best shot and hope that something resonates? My preference is to be in a co-generative design process where a client is really open to utilizing your own expertise
Mm-hmm.
to helping them shape things along the way, because to me, that's when you actually learn more. You can serve them better on the design on the front end, but you can also listen differently,
Mm-hmm.
in the actual engagement.
Yeah. So I appreciate, we just went through like a little bit of a hot seat there, kind of back and forth.
It's all right.
That wasn't planned, but you just set it up so beautifully that I wanted to dig into some of your experience and thoughts around that. I think people will find that valuable. So let's kind of get back to the scheduled programming, which is, I'd like to understand how you got to where you are. What was your educational path before getting to the world of business?
Right. Well, my educational path was a dual BA degree, and that was in history and psychology. And then I went from there to the University of York in England and earned an MA in medieval studies. And so that's ... related to business. How? Well, there's some fairly medieval ideas that come out in business.
Right.
Psychology is always useful.
Sure.
But I had an opportunity to go to work for the National Association of College Auxiliary Services. And that was the first national organization that I worked for, and was hired actually as their number 2 after having done a few other business jobs before that. And that led then to my first CEO position 3 years after that. And I stayed in that role then for the majority of my career in a variety of positions. And one of the things that's wonderful about moving from organization to organization or company to company is learning where your sweet spot is and what you love. And I found that while I was brought into many of those organizations and wound up playing the change agent role, that, I loved the people part of the work. I loved the dynamics work, the strategy work. I had done implementation, couldn't do it well,
Right.
but I loved those components. And so I decided that instead of working for boards one-on-one the rest of my career, that I wanted to be able to help more people, more companies and organizations And so I went and earned my coaching designation. I started consulting on the side while I was still a CEO, and built my practice, that way. And also built my, my collateral and all of that during that time period. And then was able to step full time with a solid pipeline. And so, I've never sort of missed a beat, as opposed to what many, many people do in having to have several years of building a business. So I'm very blessed and very thankful for that. But it proved to be the right thing for me, because I just love being able to help people exceed their expectations of themselves. That's what floats my boat.
I got two questions for you on that. I mean, the first is, for other CEOs or people in the C-suite, or those that have had experience, at the kind of senior levels in an organization, is there anything that you did that you feel kind of helped you to like leverage that experience or leverage that way of thinking into your consulting business? Anything that you feel kind of gives you an advantage, and maybe you notice that not enough people kind of shine a spotlight on that? Is there anything there that's kind of often overlooked?
Well, what I would say is that I was fortunate in that, let me back up. Any opportunity that presented itself, I took advantage of the opportunity. I stayed in continuous learning. I made sure that my approach to the communities that I was going to serve was one of contribution, and did everything that I could to, remain visible in a way that was making that contribution. Now, I didn't do that in a sort of Machiavellian approach or anything. That's who I am at the core. I want to be involved, and I want to give and participate. What that does, though, is it also gives people an opportunity to experience you. And it gave me a chance to be exposed to a lot of different ways of thinking strategically. I got a chance to see a lot of different organizations and companies in terms of how their approaches, how they played out, what was successful, what wasn't. And most importantly, I learned how to develop people and set them free in their roles to be able to really succeed. And that has served me well in the CEO seat, but it's also served me well as I continue to help develop people in a variety of ways now.
And so as you were still kind of in that CEO role, you made what we kind of call like the side transition, right? You didn't jump and burn all the boats. You were still working.
Right.
You started taking some clients on the side. How do you get those first few clients? For those that are maybe in a similar position right now, any tips that you might offer in terms of how to go out, leverage that capacity that you have to work with others, build up that client base while you're still engaged in a full-time role or doing something else?
Well, I'd say, first of all, don't hide.
Right.
It's important for people to begin to see you as a thought leader. So whether that's, you're posting articles on LinkedIn, or you're doing a podcast or whatever, begin to be seen in the community. As I earned my coaching designation, I didn't hide that I was also, a coach. And so then people who trusted me already in that space felt like that was a safe space to come, and be part of. People who had watched me help transform organizations began to say, well, would you come do strategy for us? And so I think your work does have to speak for itself. And you also have to make the efforts. And, one of the things I would also say is, yes, go ahead and build a website, do the things that allow you to begin to consolidate content that people can come and see and go on that journey with you. Of course, we all have to be careful about our employers and having them perceive that they are, in fact, receiving 100% of what they're paying for, right? So there is that, be fully respectful of the current position that you have. And I also found that being, open about those things with my employers was really important too. And so they knew that, I had relationships with, other consulting firms, or they knew that I was speaking at XYZ. And I think that's important. Be authentic and be honest.
Let's fast forward then to more recent times, or even today. You mentioned you got your first few clients just from being out there, telling people what you're doing. What about now? What's working for you best right now to bring in new leads, new conversations, new prospective business?
Yeah, I would say a huge part of it remains word of mouth. And word of mouth, not just with somebody who's at a meeting and says, you ought to call Cynthia, but literally people who are also willing to, and surprise me by posting things, in social media, who are saying, hey, worked with, or they're answering a question somebody says, and you really should call Cynthia about that. When you have your own clients who were being your advocates, it's so humbling to see that happen, but it's also very important, to have that kind of backing. I think the other part is staying that thought leader and being consistent about that is also very important. It always surprises me the number of times somebody says they read an article or they saw a posting, and you're like, well, that didn't get 2,000 likes. Oh, okay,
Right.
you saw it. And so I think all of that is important. I have been down the path of having people talk about all the different ways that you can be intentional around marketing and social media and those sorts of things. And for me, that's not been something that I have chosen to do on a regular basis. And I know a lot of that is shifting right over the last couple of years too. So for me, I would say it's the clients within the pipelines that you're using is a really big part of it.
I'd love to drill a little bit deeper into that
Mhm.
idea of having advocates.
Yes.
There's no better business than getting business through referral, right? There's trust already
Right.
built there. People already feel more comfortable. It tends to be the most profitable, deals. Just requires less effort and energy and so forth.
Yeah.
That being said, is it really just as simple as just doing great work and then having people talk about you? Or if you really kind of analyze why people are doing that and what's gone into the relationship, like, is there anything, I guess what I'm looking for is, if we were to kind of look at the wall and inspect it, are there some kind of cracks or opportunities in that wall that would lead us to something more? Like, is there something more
Yeah.
that you're doing that is actually, you're being more proactive to try and create more of that referral business?
So it's probably not going to be the answer that you're thinking it might be. um, what I'm finding is that it's the value on the back end of the engagement that I think is helping to set some things apart. And that would be, not, well, first of all, trying to make sure that whatever is being delivered is customized. I think is number one, really important. I think the second thing is going beyond what your client thought they were going to get is, and surprising them has been something that I'm consistently seeing. The other thing that I would say is stylistically, I'm having repeated people talk about the experience they have in the room in the moment that they feel is different. And I've actually struggled with trying to put the legs on what does that mean,
Right.
so that it becomes marketable to say
Right.
what that is, right? Chief experience weaver, yay, but what does that mean? For someone who doesn't know. And but to me, there is a combination of the tangible and the intangible that is essentially coming across as, you need to have this experience. It's not what you're used to having in this setting. That's what I feel like is driving some of it. The other thing I would say is being in relationship with your clients, I believe, is also a differentiator.
Can you explain what that means?
Yes. We can look at clients as client A, B, C, D, and how's the calendar filling up and all of that. But if we become to them, they begin to experience us as part of their team. That, I think, is also a differentiator that has them say, you want to engage this person because you're going to experience them as part of your team, not as the consultant who does a piece of work, right? And check the piece of work is done. I think that's another really key component particularly right now, since we've had how we used to be in relationship really stretched and challenged the last couple of years.
Right. So referring to kind of COVID and
Yeah.
separation, you'll not be able to be together as much. That makes a lot of sense. You in your business,
Mhm.
you have worked with many different industries.
Yes.
And I wonder, is that like, was it always that way? Or when you were earlier in the development of your consulting business, did you focus more on specific industries? And how do you feel that has impacted kind of how you think about marketing and how you think about your
Mhm.
service offerings? You know, being kind of a specialist or specializing in certain industries as opposed to more working with a broader, more general, diverse group of industries.
Yeah, it's a great question. So yes, for the most part, it's always been diverse, and obviously diversity built, over time. What I've found in the areas that I concentrate in is that, meaning strategy, governance, leadership, those areas. What I've found is that it keeps me on my toes. The work doesn't change depending upon the industry you're in. Yes, the acronyms change, and yes, the things you have to learn change. But having that broader knowledge of essentially how the world works
Mm-hmm.
actually makes me, I think, a better consultant myself. And I believe I do a better job by being able to bring all of that in than if I was just a specialist in an area. Now, I am not saying that consultants who specialize in an area are not bringing significant value, and I certainly don't want to come across that way. But I do think that for me, what that has led to is that I can bring you this talent, and I can bring you this skill set, and no, you won't get less of an engagement
Right.
because I, have worked with a variety of industries. There are some industries that prefer to work with consultants that are dedicated to that, and I applaud that and have no issues with that. But what I've found is I also like having my fingers in a lot of pies, and I don't actually market as a generalist. I market that I bring these skill sets to any organization or company that wants to engage in these ways.
Right. Yeah. I think, especially because so much of your business is coming from referrals, you're not necessarily having to be as laser focused on
Right.
say, marketing to a specific industry because a lot of your lead flow is coming to you as opposed to you having to go out and drum up that business.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um, so looking kind of at your service offerings, you engage with clients in many different ways.
Mhm.
Do you find that overall clients tend to start with one specific service and then go to another one and another one, or is it just kind of random in the way that they come in and engage with you?
So the answer is yes. And so you're absolutely correct. There are some clients that come in and it'll start with coaching the CEO, and the next thing you know, you're doing a board orientation, and then you're doing strategy, for the whole organization. Other times there is an engagement, and it's around strategy, and it's great, well done, thank you very much, and and that happens to be it, and they'll come back when they want to refresh their strategy. So both happen, and I'm open to both and love it when I get to be a part of the team. And I'm also happy to provide the services when, they want a singular approach.
Right. Is there one service offering that you tend to put more of a focus or spotlight on as opposed to the others, or is it just kind of spread across evenly and you cast it out there and you see what comes?
Yeah, I let the client sort of decide that, and so it's more of a cast it out there, and I go where where it is in the moment. So, and it does wander,
Right.
it absolutely wanders, but it's kind of exciting to let that happen because, like I say, it keeps you on your toes as well. Oh, okay, we're gonna do that again.
Right. Your pricing strategy, I'm wondering, has it evolved over time? Like, is there anything that you do today from how you price your services that is very different than the way that you maybe did it 5 years ago or before that? Anything that stands out that you've learned and applied, especially more recently?
Yeah. I think the thing that strikes me the most, and I say this to anyone who is listening, who may be just starting out, is is to, it's natural to be careful about your pricing at the beginning because you're worried about overpricing yourself. However, you want to be careful that you don't necessarily put yourself out there as the low priced option and have that be misinterpreted. So what I would say is the confidence that comes over time in pricing strategy, I think is something that you need to be aware of early on and shorten that curve to get to, pricing yourself appropriately for what you value, what your value is. And then secondly, I would say that the thing that I think is an important consideration is, do you want to do more, larger, high-priced, and fewer, or do you want to just be taking everything that comes down the pike?
Right. For value versus volume.
Absolutely. And so, part of that depends on whether or not how much you want to work, right? And part of it also depends on, is your preference larger projects, or is your preference get something done and move on? So for me, I've had to figure that out over time. And I would say I have a mix, but the way that I address the mix and how the pricing impacts it is to make determinations about how much I want to work.
Right.
And that really helped me a lot to get that sorted.
Could you maybe offer us a bit of like a look behind the curtain into how you think about that? So in your case specifically, Cynthia, is there anything you can share around like how much you want to work, and then based on how you think about that, decisions that you've made around the offerings or services or pricing and so forth?
Yeah. So what I want to do is, so first of all, I love my work. So I work a lot, and I'll be honest about that. What I realized a few years ago was that I needed to pull some of the things back into the weekday, the regular weekday, that I was allowing to creep into the weekend. And so I was losing my quality of life. And so while so I try to keep my engagements to the 5 days in a week, which means on the 6th day, both business and personal business stuff is usually in play at some point to some degree. And the 7th day is, nope, that's mine. Right. That impacts then taking on, how much coaching I take on versus leaving the time to also do some of the big projects. And I try to then think about, how many big projects I want to take on in any quarter. And I try to look at it from a quarterly perspective, because I have noticed a rhythm over the years. And so I know that for sure, the 4th quarter and the 1st quarter are just going to be crazy. And then, when you've got people who are going on vacation and doing all that kind of stuff, that changes in the big projects in the summer. And so, I can do, while I stay busy, I can also potentially write a book. I can pull some hours in there. Right. So I also have to figure out how much content creation time I want in a year. And that's very important to me as well, because I like to create new content that's not client driven.
Yeah, and I find that really interesting, and kind of connects directly to another question I wanted to ask you about, which is you have partners that you work with, different firms that you might refer business to, or kind of support each other. But it seems, and correct me if I'm wrong, that your business is mainly you. I'd love to know, like, why kind of that decision. Did you ever think about building a team? How intentional, are you in keeping the business just you, or how do you handle business and trying to grow and taking on everything that you do if it mainly is just yourself?
Yeah, it's such a great question. The intentionality question is a really important piece. So I'm going to answer that. Let me answer the tangential part first. And that is, yes, I do have consulting firms where if there is a piece of work that, yes, I could do it, but I actually believe that this firm will do it better, I absolutely will refer them to those firms, and certainly have done that. If there is an opportunity to partner with another firm where I know we have synergies and want to do that, I'll absolutely reach out to some that do that. So both of those things are in play. The intentionality part, I love that you asked that question. I did make an intentional decision to primarily be a solopreneur. I wanted to do, as I said to you, I went through that formulation of what work did I want to do, what was my sweet spot. And I had run businesses for decades. I didn't need to run another business. And I wanted to do the work I wanted to do. I didn't want to worry about, am I 1099? Am I, what's the HR policy? I'd done that. And I really wanted to do the work. And I really wanted to be able to write books and do other things that were going to be part of a legacy that I wanted to be able to leave. And what I will say to you is, if I had started the firm, when I was 35, I probably would have made a different decision. But I didn't do that. What I did was I intentionally built my career so that by the time I was 50, I had options. And that option could be sit in a CEO seat until you retire. The option could be quit. The option could be start something else. And so for me, the intentionality started early about creating options, but I didn't have to put the option in play until I was ready to make that decision. Then when I made the decision, I was like, no, I want to spend my time doing the work, not running a business.
Yeah. That makes me think, do you consider yourself to be, in your current role and kind of current form, a business builder, or do you view yourself more like an artist? Because, you referred to doing the work, and you haven't necessarily talked as much about actively like building the business. And I don't mean that in the way that that you're not building business. I'm just,
Right.
How do you think about those things? Because some people, they get into this and they start off doing the work, but over time they feel like, oh, well, actually, I want to make a bigger impact. I want to be able to take on more projects. I want to be able to grow revenue. I can't do all of that myself. I can't implement. Therefore, I need a team, or I need better systems or processes or productization in order to kind of scale and grow. How do you think about that?
Yeah. So what I did was, I had a baseline number that I always wanted to know that I was hitting. And I didn't spend a lot of time on, I'm going to grow the business by X every year. I've been very blessed that it has. And I'm very thankful for that. But my intentionality was not around building a business that when I hit X age, I was then going to sell the content or sell a business to another consulting firm or whatever. That was never my intention. It really was about doing the work. And so in light of that, what's funny is that I help other people build businesses all the time.
Yeah.
I've helped other consultants start their businesses, and things like that.
Yeah.
But that was not the driver for me. It was more about walking beside those who were in fact doing that.
Yeah.
And then sort of whatever came of that in the end was whatever came. And that's the blessing of having lived my life in a way that I could have choices.
Yeah. It's such a gift to have options, and a gift, not meaning that it's just about luck. It requires hard work, dedication, and commitment, but to have options is such a wonderful thing. Just a few more questions. And one that I'm really thinking about, we've talked a lot about how you've accomplished a lot. You've made that transition from being in the CEO kind of role to consulting, doing coaching, and it all kind of paints a pretty rosy picture right now. Take me to challenges. What is maybe, one challenge that really stands out for you, something that either you're still working to overcome, or something that you did overcome, but really kind of either held you back, or was just kind of a tough nut to crack? What stands out for you kind of in that challenge realm?
Oh, I can answer that one directly. I had run so hard and so fast in the beginning years of the business, and was in fact generating content constantly in creation and all of that. I realized one day that not only had I not pulled all of that together, but I didn't know for myself how I wanted to express my work and what that work was becoming. I was doing work people were satisfied with, but I couldn't speak my work. myself. And so I literally intentionally engaged. I set a time frame in which I wanted to assess all of that. And I engaged a consultant who happens to be a friend of mine. He's a futurist. And he's always about 3 or 4 years ahead of me in how his business has unfolded. And he had developed a process to really take you through your paces of getting all of that sorted out. And so we did that over a period of time. And he subsequently refined that process even further. And what that did was it gave me language that was authentic to me about how I do my work. And then it allowed me to then start weaving that into my work. It's not like I say, here's the 10 top principles, sort of thing, and everybody has to, do those. But it's more how I speak my work, how I help people understand what we do. I am writing a book about it as well. But I had lost the core thread that mapped who I was, how I saw my work, and how I wanted to iterate my work. In that process. And that was something I could not keep working anymore and not get that sorted.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I want to ask you about your habits, and so you've got a lot going on. As you said, you do like to work a lot, right? You like to get stuff done. What are 1 or 2 things that you do on a daily basis that you feel really contribute to higher levels of performance or kind of mental clarity, focus, productivity? Just anything that you have that is key to that?
Yeah. So absolutely. One of those things is sleep. And as simple and basic as that sounds, it really does impact my productivity and my energy level. The second thing is I'm a faith-based person. So I start with that at the beginning of my day to ground me and where are we going now? And then I think the third thing for me is I do a reassessment at the beginning of the day about how I've mapped out the day. And, I've always done that at the end of the day and sort of, here's how we're headed. But when I get up at the beginning of the day, I give myself an opportunity to look at the calendar and to say, what's reasonable, what's possible, and where can I make an adjustment that will make this a better day for the people I'm serving and for me. And I've found if I'll just give myself that little moment of grace, it is amazing how the calendar shifts. It all gets done, but it gets done in a more productive way.
Yeah, I think that's a really great example of the power of focus and, again, being intentional and prioritization. It's very easy just for us to all be so busy in our day and everything else going around us. Whether it's kids or just family members or the distractions and chaos of life.
Right.
And so being able to get clear on, what should I really focus on today? What is urgent? What is most important? I think that's great advice. So 2 more questions before we wrap up. The first one is, over the last 6 months or so, what is a book that you have either read or listened to? It can be fiction or nonfiction that you would recommend, or you just feel like, yeah, I really enjoyed reading this or listening to it.
Yeah, I was going to say, one of the things this is going to sound really strange. So I grew up in the town of Stanton, Virginia, in the Shenandoah Valley. And the Statler brothers came from my town. And they were a very popular country music, very awarded group. And I grew up with their kids. And they have done an amazing job of memorializing a period of time in history and their experiences, which really have shown me what it means when a group of people commit to goals, don't lose their values in that process, and know when it's time to step back. And so just reading that and having known them obviously makes it special, but it's also very inspirational to watch in the entire journey of a career and the faithfulness that they had to each other, as well as sort of the vision that they had that they continued to expand. So that was very meaningful to me.
Okay. Yeah, I have really no knowledge at all
Yes.
of their world and their
Yeah.
story. So, do you know the name of that book? If not, I'll look it up. But
I was going to say, not right at the top of my head. They've written several. I'm sorry.
that's okay. We'll find it, put in the show notes.
Yeah.
People can obviously do a Google search as well and look that up. And then finally, for those that want to learn more about you, Cynthia, your work, everything you have going on, I know you have a bunch of books as well. You said you're working on another one. Where's the best place for people to go to learn more?
Yeah, absolutely. The website is theleadershaven.com, or they can always find me on LinkedIn, Cynthia Mills, and that's also the Leaders Haven CEO.
Well, Cynthia, thanks so much for coming on here today, spending some time with us, and sharing some of your journey and a look inside to kind of how you got to where you are.
It's absolutely my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.